Right, we can debate whether you like it or not. For some reason, the majority of the country thought this was the man for the moment. They like the way he speaks. They like the way he posts. They like what he puts out there.
Is it okay?
If majority of the country thinks so.
So if the majority of the country thinks that like the Earth is flat, that's okay?
Well, that's why we have elections, right? We both know the Earth's not flat, but I think.
And we both know that behavior is not okay.
Look,
I don't see it as a different bar. I think people are criticizing it. You're criticizing it. It gets criticized by Republicans and Democrats all the time. I think the concession is that this is just not new. That is who he is.
You guys are right that this is not a new Donald Trump, but the situation that we're in is new. It is unique. We've never had a war going on while gas prices are spiking, while inflation is spiking, and while the debt is just ballooning. I mean, Doge at the beginning of Trump's term was purported to cut costs, right? Cost overruns were supposed to be cut. Not only did they miserably fail at that, but now the deficit is up, and now he's pursuing a $1 billion ballroom. He's pursuing a $1.2 trillion golden. The ballroom?
Yes. The ballroom is privately funded.
Well, they're now asking for the Secret Service.
You're talking about security, and it's 20%.
Okay, let's talk
We can talk about the security.
Here we have Adam Mockler and Jason Rantz going head-to-head on CNN's Newsnight over Trump's $1 billion White House ballroom. And I want to share my honest take on what unfolds here. Underneath all the back and forth, this conversation is really about who this presidency is actually being run for, regular Americans or the people signing the big checks. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I want to know where you stand on this topic. All right, let's get into it.
Tonight, erratic and unhinged. That's what critics are calling Donald Trump's behavior over the last 24 hours. From a social media repost accusing Barack Obama of treason to his outburst against reporters. Over the course of an hour and 15 minutes overnight, Trump posted more than 50 times, parroting debunked claims and firing off personal attacks, prompting critics to question his mental state. But today, as the president departed for one of his most consequential foreign trips in recent memory, a reporter's basic question about the ballooning cost of his ballroom seems to have set him off.
We have a ballroom that's under budget. It's going up right here. I've doubled the size of it because we obviously need that. And we're right now on budget, under budget, and ahead of schedule. I doubled the size of it, you dumb person. It's double the size. You are not a smart person.
Nothing gets him more worked up, it seems, than criticism of his ballroom, of all things. What's going on with the president, and why shouldn't Americans be concerned about a president that is retweeting unhinged things in the middle of the night, then waking up the next morning and screaming at reporters, calling women, in that case a black woman, for the second time in a week, a dumb person?
I think we have to be honest here, whether you like him or hate him, this is not a new Donald Trump. Right? We have seen this man speak the way that he speaks, post the way that he posts. I think he was famous for his tweets long before he ran for office, and yet 80 million Americans voted him right back in. So I think the question is, why did America think this is the president that we need, right? We can debate whether you like it or not. For some reason, the majority of the country thought this was the man for the moment. They like the way he speaks. They like the way he posts. They like what he puts out there.
Is it okay?
If majority of the country thinks so.
So if the majority of the country thinks that like the Earth is flat, that's okay?
Well, that's why we have elections, right? We both know the Earth's not flat, but I think.
And we both know that behavior is not okay.
Republicans for a long time were telling me, Joe Biden couldn't do the job. A majority of Americans elected him too. That didn't stop you from criticizing him for everything under the sun, and perhaps rightfully so. But I'm just wondering, why is there a different bar for this president?
Well, I don't see it as a different bar. I think people are criticizing it. You're criticizing it. It gets criticized by Republicans and Democrats all the time. I think the concession is that this is just not new. Right. The idea that people now are calling him unhinged with it. You've always called him unhinged with his tweets. I mean, that is not a new story.
You're right.
And I think it is a fair criticism, right, that it's not presidential. I don't think it's particularly presidential, and I wish he wouldn't do it because I think it ends up causing him a lot more headache than he needs. But it's also a case of you can't change that. That is who he is.
You guys are right that this is not a new Donald Trump, but the situation that we're in is new. It is unique. We've never had a war going on while gas prices are spiking, while inflation is spiking, and while the debt is just ballooning.
So here is what just happened. Jason Rantz gets asked a direct question about the president's behavior, the late-night posting, the screaming at a reporter, calling a black woman a dumb person for asking about a ballroom. And his answer is essentially, 80 million people voted for him, so what are you complaining about? That is not a defense. That's a deflection dressed up as a defense. And the second Adam calls it out, the earth is flat line, Jason has no answer. He just pivots to Biden. Classic move. When you can't defend your side, drag in the other guy. But here's what Jason accidentally does right. He admits the situation is new. He says it himself. We've never had a war going on while gas prices are spiking, while inflation is spiking, and while the debt is ballooning. He conceded the entire point Adam was trying to make and didn't even realize it. That's not a debate win. That's a man walking right into his own argument. And that sets up everything that comes next, because once you admit the moment is different, you have to answer for what the president is actually doing with it.
I mean, Doge at the beginning of Trump's term was purported to cut costs, right? Cost overruns were supposed to be cut. Not only did they miserably fail at that, but now the deficit is up, and now he's pursuing a $1 billion ballroom. He's pursuing a $1.2 trillion gold. The ballroom?
Yes. The ballroom is privately funded.
Well, they're now
You're
asking
talking
for the
about
Secret
security.
Service.
You're talking about security, and it's 20%.
Okay, well, let's talk
We can
about
talk
that.
about the security
Let's
piece,
talk
yeah.
about that, because I think this is also a big topic on Capitol Hill today. Lots of Republicans skeptical. There is a $1 billion price tag that was labeled as being for the president's ballroom project. And when you look at the details, it's really $220 million for the White House complex, which includes some things that seem to be related to the ballroom and perhaps things that are not. And then the rest of it seems to be hundreds of millions of dollars, to the tune of nearly $800 million for things that seem to be part of the normal job, frankly, of the Secret Service, of DHS. And look at those numbers and just remember that the Department of Homeland Security received a budget last year that was 2 times its normal budget. It was $190-something billion that they just received in funding, and now they're trying to justify $1 billion for all of these things.
Yeah, well, I think we may have lost our ability to see outrage here, because there's so much every single day that is coming out of this White House that is outrageous, that is, potentially corrupt. I mean, it's interesting about the private donors. I'm actually not so keen on the private donors. Horse trading, that we know has gone on. But I think people, and this is very worrisome, I think something we've all touched on, people's pain, which is economic right now, big time, coupled with the turning away from reliable news sources and the fragmentation of news and the ownership of the control of information by a handful of very powerful people, some of which I'm sure have donated to the ballroom. That's all part of a very worrisome turn towards oligopoly in this country.
And I think
Adam drops the receipts here. DOG was sold to the American people as a cost-cutting machine. Waste was going to be eliminated. Efficiency was the whole pitch. And what happened? The deficit went up, not down, up. And now the same administration that promised to cut spending is defending a project with $1 billion price tag attached to a ballroom. I'll give the other side this. They make a fair point that the full billion includes Secret Service and DHS expenses that aren't strictly ballroom costs. The breakdown is $220 million for the White House complex itself and nearly $800 million in broader security and infrastructure spending. Fine, but here's the thing. The Department of Homeland Homeland Security already received $19 billion, roughly double its normal budget just last year. So now they need another $800 million on top of that, and we're supposed to just accept that framing without asking questions? You cannot say DOG exists to cut waste and then turn around and tell me an extra $800 million in security spending for a ballroom renovation is just business as usual. You cannot say both of those things. Pick one. And then Ra's point lands like a hammer. She says private donors funding a project like this is not reassuring, it's concerning, because when wealthy people donate to a president's pet project, they don't do it out of the goodness of their hearts. That's not how power works. And that leads directly into the final clip, which is where this whole thing comes into focus.
It's such an important point. And I just want to note, like the way you're pointing out the connection between this ballroom and the economic pain that people are feeling. You're not the only person who made note of that. Jim Justice, let me just read this quote. He says, "I can't get my hands around the fact that a lot of people are really hurting and they see $1 billion, and $1 billion is an awful, awful, awful lot of money." Mm-hmm. When you see that B in front of a number, it's like, what?
What? Yeah, it's almost too hard to conceptualize for most people. $1 million is almost too hard to conceptualize for some people. Quite honestly, $100,000 in most Americans' lives right now feels so far out of reach. This is, just to continue on your point, this is part of the strategy, though. I actually don't think, I think Donald Trump is a bit unhinged at times. And I also think he's pretty strategic. I think he wants, I think, we're talking about him. Zone. We're flooding the zone. And so we could either talk about these tweets or him calling a reporter unjustifiably and disrespectfully dumb and stupid, or we could keep our eye on the ball and that we're in a war that we have no plans to get out, that Americans are suffering, and there's a B in front of this thing called a ballroom. Not just the ballroom. The B is for billions. And so I just... 80 million Americans did vote for him, but I'm not exactly sure if they voted exactly for this. And I just implore the American people not to be distracted. Democrats or Republicans, not to be distracted, because we deserve better than what we are getting right now from our elected officials, particularly the president.
A triumphal arch, even the renovation of the reflecting pool, which, reflecting pool always needs to be renovated, it seems. All of these are things that seem to be distractions.
They are.
Young people get a lot of flack for having a lack of focus or being easily distractible, but I see the President of the United States as a more distractible person than any young person right now. Again, he's pursuing this ballroom, he's pursuing the reflecting pool, but he also wants a 60% increase in the military budget to refund and repay for the missiles that we used against Iran to get nothing in the first place. So it is economic calamity, and Donald Trump is focused on side projects. Very, very unfocused.
Here's the contradiction at the center of this whole exchange that nobody on that panel can walk back once it's been said out loud. Jason Rantz spent the first half of this segment arguing that Trump's behavior isn't new, that America knew what it was getting, that 80 million people signed off on it. And then Adam spends the back half laying out exactly what that behavior is costing us in real time. A rising deficit, a failing cost-cutting agency, a $1 billion vanity project, and a 60% proposed increase in military spending on top of everything else. And you cannot hold both of those positions at the same time. You cannot say the voters knew what they were choosing and also ask them to just look past what that choice is actually producing. That is not a coherent defense. That is hoping nobody does the math. And Jim Justice did the math. A Republican senator. He said it plainly. I can't get my hands around the fact that a lot of people are really hurting and they see $1 billion. That is a Republican breaking ranks to say this doesn't add up. And when your own side can't explain a number to struggling voters, that number is a problem. Now zoom out for a second. Think about what $1 billion actually means to the people watching this video. Ashley said it perfectly in that clip. $100,000 in most Americans' lives right now feels completely out of reach. That's not hyperbole. Household debt is at record levels. Credit card delinquencies are climbing. People are cutting back on groceries, skipping doctor's appointments, putting off car repairs, and deciding whether they can afford to take a week off this summer. That is the reality on the ground for tens of millions of Americans right now. And the headline coming out of the White House this week is about a ballroom, not an inflation relief plan, not a housing affordability proposal, a ballroom with a B. And here's where Ray's point about oligarchy has to be taken seriously because I think it gets dismissed too quickly. When wealthy private donors fund a president's signature project, access follows money. It always has. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's how influence has worked in this country for as long as there has been a country. The question isn't whether something improper happened. The question is whether ordinary Americans should be comfortable with a situation where the president's personal renovation project is being bankrolled by the same class of people who benefit most from his policies. And the honest answer is no. Nobody should be comfortable with that. The optics alone are disqualifying. Ashley also makes a point that I think is the sharpest observation in this entire segment, and it deserves more attention than it got. She says Trump is partly strategic about all of this. The constant flood of controversy, the tweets at midnight, the insults, the spectacle. It keeps everyone arguing about the latest outrage while the real issues get buried. And she's right. We're in a segment about a ballroom, not about the deficit, not about the fact that DOGE, which was the crown jewel of this administration's cost-cutting promises, failed so completely that the deficit actually went up on their watch, not about a proposed 60% increase in military spending to cover the cost of missiles fired at Iran in an operation that, by the panel's own accounting, produced nothing. All of that is in the background, while everyone argues about square footage and private donors and whether $1 billion is really $1 billion. That is flooding the zone, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Now let me be straight about who had the stronger argument here, because that's why you're watching. Adam won this, not because he was louder or angrier, he wasn't. He won because he came with the actual logic. Jason's entire defense rested on two moves. 80 million people voted for this, and Biden did things too. Neither of those is an argument about the ballroom. Neither of those is an argument about a rising deficit. Neither of those is a response to the fact that the agency created specifically to cut government waste has produced a government that wastes more. You don't win a debate by pointing at the other team's old mistakes. You win by defending your own current ones. And Jason couldn't do that because there is no defense for this that holds together under any pressure at all. Ra and Ashley also deserve credit here. Ra connected the ballroom to something much bigger: the concentration of wealth, the control of information, the ownership of political access by a handful of extraordinarily powerful people, some of whom almost certainly wrote checks to fund this project. That is not a small point. That is the entire architecture of how power gets consolidated in a democracy, right before people stop being able to call it one. And Ashley brought it back to earth with a message that I think every single American, regardless of party, should actually hear. Don't be distracted. Democrats, Republicans, doesn't matter. We deserve better than what we are getting right now. And that right there is the whole ball game. Because the thing this segment exposes is not just a ballroom, it is a pattern. It is a presidency that promised to fight for regular people while cutting backroom deals with exactly the kind of wealthy donors it claimed to be fighting against. It is a cost-cutting agenda that produced more debt. It is a media strategy built entirely around making sure you are always arguing about something just flashy enough to keep you from looking at the numbers. And the numbers are bad. So here is the question I want to leave you with, and I want an actual answer in the comments because this one matters. If a Democratic president had come into office promising to slash government waste, watched the deficit go up instead, and then spent public attention defending $1 billion renovation of the White House funded by private donors with political interests, would you have accepted the same defenses you are hearing right now? Yes or no? Because that answer tells you everything about whether this is actually about principles or whether it has always just been about the team.